Hello, everybody. How are you? All you patriots out there, we, we're going to have a show tonight that I think you'll be really interested in. This is the Sahuarita Tea Party Update Show. And I'm Don Woolley, your host, and we're going to talk about politics and coronavirus. Got some really good MedCram videos for you that I'm going to play. I think there's 3 of them, and I'm going to actually do them out of a little bit of sequence because the one that came out today is really good. And I know one of the things I want to comment out right up front is first I'll announce that I believe there is a MAGA meetup meeting this Wednesday, March 18th, at the Triple Play Restaurant on Duval Mine Road. And we're going to have, or they're going to have a guest from the Trump Victory Campaign. Her name is Michelle Ludwig. And she's going to talk to those folks that go to the meeting about helping President Trump win the election in November. So I don't think you want to miss that. And it's an opportunity to interface directly with someone that's involved in Trump's campaign. So anyway, I wanted to announce that. There's also an LD2 meeting, I believe, next Saturday, the 21st. And the the Pima GOP dinner is scheduled for tomorrow night, March 14th, at the Hilton Hotel on Broadway. And I haven't heard that's been canceled. So right now, as far as I know, it's on, and there's some other things that are being canceled. But that's kind of all the announcements I have right now. We're doing this on Friday night because we had a conflict last night and some technical problems too. So I decided not to do anything last night, and that we could do it tonight. The coast is pretty clear as far as, unless you want to watch the Joe Biden, Bernie Sanders, no audience debate in Phoenix. Good luck with that. I don't want to hear what either one of those old fools has to say. So, they're both a lot older than me. So Joe Biden is senile and Bernie Sanders is a commie. So sorry, but it's true. You can call him a socialist, but he's really a communist. So did anybody hear Rush today? He's quite concerned about what's going on in the country, the closures, the cancellations. And so that's why I want to play this first video, because I know where he's coming from, and he's really right about it. The Republicans are letting the Democrats again set the agenda, and that's what always gets Rush riled up. The Republicans accept their premise, and then they come up with a, better solution or whatever to the premise that was made. So, the media and the Democrats are driving this coronavirus fear thing, and we're going to get through this. It's going to last a few weeks here. It's not going to go on for 1 or 2 years. That ain't going to happen. And when it gets summer, the warm months are coming. We hit in the 90s up in Phoenix the 1st of April. That's when I was stationed at Luke Air Force Base. It consistently was 90 degrees on the 1st of April. So the hot weather's coming, and that's supposed to be bad for this virus. So if you folks anyway listen to Rush today, he was just flabbergasted at what's going on in the country. But I think this MedCram video will kind of explain things to you that I'm going to play here now. And it talks about how you can. One of the things we need to do in the country right now is we need to fight the spread, okay? And we can still do that. We can still get ahead of the curve, and that's what this doctor is going to talk about. So I'm gonna play that video, and the doctor will go into those facts, and then a couple other MedCram videos following that, and I'll say a few words in between. And then I've got some PowerPoint slides, a couple of them that the government's put out, the CDC website, some good advice for how to handle this in your home and how businesses should handle this. So listen, we don't need to shut our lives down. It's okay to be prepared. We don't need to go to Costco and Walmart and buy all the toilet paper out and buy all the alcohol cleaning lotion out, or I mean, that's just silly, and that's just overreaction, okay? But it's okay to be prepared. It's okay to have a few things for a few weeks. If you got quarantined for 14 days, get yourself, prepared to cover that period, and you'll be okay. So this is really showing to be a bad virus for people in their late 70s, 80s, 90s, older people, especially if they had a existing medical condition. It's rough on them, but if you're not in those age groups, just be careful and follow the good advice you're getting. So, and President Trump, he declared a national emergency today because he wants that federal money to be able to get to the states to help them cover some of their expenses. Whether President Trump agrees to a bill with the Democrats, I don't know. Nancy Pelosi was on today before him, trying to upstage him, and she was talking about more school lunches. Yeah, go figure, and food banks, and I don't know. They always turn to the children and feeding the children and feeding whatever. But I don't think, I think what Trump's got in mind is a payroll tax cut that's going to be a tax cut till the end of the year. That's what he'd like to see done. So is he going to sign up to their stuff? Are they going to put a payroll tax cut in this bill? I don't know. I'm not certain. I'm kind of hoping he doesn't sign up to their stuff. And I think maybe declaring a national emergency frees up him some money to help the situation anyway, without the Democrats, without the Congress jumping in there. Now, what the Senate wants to do, I don't know. Whether the Senate would go for that same stuff, I'm not sure. I mean, we probably have 2 or 3 Republicans that are weasel Republicans that we have, the 2 or 3 that seem to fight Trump all the way and agree with the Democrats. So whether the Senate would pass or not, who knows? But anyway, okay. Right now, I'm going to start this MedCram video, and I want you to watch it, and I'll turn this bumper music down, and we'll get going here. So stand by.
Interact with each other in a negative way in terms of prolonging the QT interval. For those of you who don't know what the QT interval is, this is a measurement of electrical conduction in the myocardium, in the heart, and if the QT becomes too prolonged, you can get fatal cardiac arrhythmias.
Okay, stand by, folks. We're going to get it up here in a second. Operator air, thank you.
All those things into consideration.
Hey, I don't know if you heard, but we just had a big development in the unfolding Spygate investigations. It's just been revealed that the Justice...
All those things into consideration.
MedCram.com.
Welcome to another MedCram COVID-19 update. And as you can see, this is now become a pandemic. And this is validated with the numbers that are coming outside of China. If we go to the Worldometer site, you can see clearly we're in the acceleration phase here. And as a result of this, we are seeing some things that are very unusual, notwithstanding, of course, the stock market, which is taking a tumble at this point. But we're also starting to see things that we've never really seen before. We're starting to see official statements made because of the fact that there are groups, there are fans, there are stadiums where when you have people congregated together, it can spread disease. And we're seeing that from the NHL. We're seeing that on the NBA website. We're even seeing spring training, Major League Baseball being postponed. Governor Newsom of California is now able, through an executive order, to commandeer hotels, motels to house coronavirus patients. Patients in the state have already been moved to hotels. The Desert Sun reported that a 120-room hotel in San Carlos, which is near San Francisco, has already been tapped to house passengers from the Grand Princess cruise ship. There was an executive order released on Thursday that includes the authority for Sacramento to take over hotels and motels for medical use for coronavirus patients in a move he said will help the state of $40 million to prepare for any widespread outbreak. We're also starting to see here at the municipal government level, Garcetti, who's the mayor of Los Angeles, urging residents to take steps to protect themselves, but they also banned all events or conferences with more than 50 people. They called these common sense measures. In San Bernardino County, which is the largest county in the United States, there's not even a single confirmed case of COVID-19. And so this website here is very instructive, which I'll put a link to in the description below. And it has to do with this notion of flattening the curve. And that's what I want to talk about today. So here's the curve. If you have everybody congregating together, of course, the virus is going to move fairly quickly, it is thought. And if you don't have protective measures, that transmission is going to be very rapid. But then just as quickly, because you have burned a large swath in the population of people, there's going to be immunity that is built very quickly in the survivors, and then the curve is going to flatten out quickly as well. But there's going to be so many patients so fast coming into the hospital that we're not going to be able to take care of them. As it shows here, this is the healthcare system capacity way down here in terms of the daily number of cases. If, however, we're able to distance ourselves and to shut down the transmission of the virus by spreading us out so we're not in close contact with each other, if we're not congregating together in large masses, then the daily cases, it is thought, is going to come up slowly. Even if it's the same number of people, we can spread those out so that the amount of cases that we're seeing on a daily basis doesn't exceed our ability to take care of those people. And we can kind of see that happen in the early phases of this epidemic in China. In the epicenter of this outbreak in Wuhan, the mortality rate was calculated to be higher than the mortality rate outside. Of course, this is not a case fatality rate because we don't know exactly the toll and we don't know exactly the denominator and the numerator involved in that. But if you were to compare those two, you would see that the number of deaths divided by the number of confirmed cases was lower outside of Wuhan than it was inside of Wuhan. And of course, the reason for that was that the hospital capacity was just not there. And that was part of the reason why the Chinese felt it was necessary to build 1,000-bed hospitals. It was to take care of this swell of daily number of cases. And that distancing is going to slow down the virus. But as it has turned out here from this not peer-reviewed paper that is ready for publication, they did extensive research to answer a question that I have been asked several times, and that is, how long does this SARS-CoV-2 last on surfaces and in the air? The results are disconcerting. It showed here that the HCoV-19, or the SARS-2, was investigated, And they showed the overall stability is very similar with the original SARS-CoV-1 that was found back in 2002. They found that the viable virus could be detected into aerosols up to 3 hours post-aerosolization. So this is when somebody sneezes, or if there is an aerosolation event, like if the patient is being intubated or if they're on a positive pressure mask. This could be seen up to 4 hours on copper and up to 24 hours on cardboard and up to 2 to 3 days on plastics and stainless steel, which of course has real implications in hospitals and in operating rooms. These two viruses, SARS-CoV-1 and SARS-CoV-2, exhibited similar half-lives in aerosols with median estimates around 2.7 hours. Both viruses show relatively long viability on stainless steel and polypropylene. The median half-life was around 13 hours on steel and around 16 hours on propylene. So basically they found that these viruses can remain viable in aerosols for multiple hours and on surfaces up to days. So you can see that the importance here of masks is there, but really the key is not touching things where this virus may exist and making sure things get wiped down on a frequent basis, which may give you a question about exactly what could you use to make sure that SARS-CoV-2 virus would be eliminated. And we'll put a link in the description below to the EPA website that lists that information. Going back to this flattening of the curve, when we eliminate sporting events and meetings, things of that nature, we're able to drag this out. And even though the same number of people might become infected, we're able to better take care of them. I know exactly what it's like being on the front line and being in the intensive care unit, how frustrating it is to have more cases than you can actually take care of. It doesn't happen often, and it might happen for just a short period of time, but imagine trying to take care of a very critically ill patient and have another patient becoming critically ill right at the same time. And then as that's happening, something else is happening downstairs in the emergency room that they need help with right away.
Okay, folks, so I think this is really good information. The doctor is talking about a similar thing that Rush was talking about today, where Rush was concerned about canceling all these events and what's going on, canceling the NHL, Major League Baseball, the NBA. Seriously, who cares about the NBA? Nobody watches the NBA. Final Four, the March Madness, that's a biggie. And if your team got invited, it looks like my team got invited, even though they're playing horribly at the end of the year. But that's all for naught now. So it's just a game, and we'll get through it. But anyway, so I think it's important. What the doctor's trying to stress here is that it flattens the curve so that it's going to be better, and people are going to get better care in our hospitals if they need to go to the hospital. So I think that's all a good thing. So medically speaking, this was the advice that President Trump was given by the CDC team and all the doctors and people involved with this, and I think that's good. So I wanted to mention that to you folks, and we'll go on here with the video.
You just can't be in 3 places at once. Oftentimes when this happens, I call in a backup physician who's a colleague of mine who's in clinic that has to cancel clinic and come in and help me. Instead of being an exception to the rule, could be the rule itself. And obviously nobody wants to have a loved one or be that patient in that situation, because you want the attention of the doctor to be on you when this is happening. And of course, that's assuming that everything gets done correctly. What you don't want to have is what's described here in this medical staff update, and that is distracted doctoring and patient safety. So imagine someone being interrupted by their interruptions, and it's hard to put 2 thoughts together. You're not dealing with computers when you go into the hospital, even though there are many computers there. You're dealing with physicians who are human beings who have to think and have to decide what needs to be done on a patient, and they need to take all those things into consideration. And if they get interrupted because there's such an influx of patients coming in, that's when mistakes can also happen. And that's what this article points out, and I'll put a link to this article as well. An example of this point is a recent event. A physician was busy trying to complete progress and consult notes while waiting to get a call back on a page that he had placed. Realizing that there were orders that needed to be put on in patient A, the physician inadvertently placed a medication order into patient B's record, which was opened in Epic. Epic, for those who don't know, is the medical record system. The staff complied immediately with the order, with patient B getting the medication intended for patient A. Fortunately, patient B did not get injured by the event, but the root cause of this error was the physician's momentary distraction while trying to do several routine things at once. And that is the key. And that is generally going to happen more often if this is the situation that we have versus this being the situation that we have. We just don't have enough hospital beds, physicians, nurses, ancillary staff, respiratory therapists to be able to deal with this in a safe way. Potthoff says that if everyone practices social distancing and practices good hygiene, it will help slow the spread of the virus so that everyone who will eventually need medical care can be properly treated, so that what is happening in Italy and China doesn't happen here. Even though in many parts of the country where there are no cases, because we really don't know how widespread this virus is, because really we've undertested. So on this update, we took a little bit of a break from the molecular biology, but next week we're going to be getting into a lot of the details of this ACE2 receptor. This is the receptor that is targeted by the virus itself. And there's a lot of interesting things about this receptor, not only from a vaccination and from an entry point, but this ACE2 protein is not in isolation. It does have a function, and that function may be modified by the binding of this virus. It's interesting to talk about the implications of that modification. We're also going to talk about practical things that you can do and what does it mean to have immunity. Please subscribe to this channel if you haven't already. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Doctor. That was great. So I hope that kind of gives you all a good explanation for actually what is happening with the cancellation of some of these events. I also heard, by the way, that the Fiesta Sahuarita has been canceled. So if you haven't heard that already, that's the word on the street right now. And but anyway, all these events and the sports events and large arenas and large crowds and everything, you know, that's the purpose of why this is happening. Okay, so hang in there, folks. We'll get through this. There's a method to the madness, and we have to rely on our healthcare experts. So, and now the next video I'm going to play is actually an older MedCram from 2 or 3 days ago, but it really goes into treatment of coronavirus and what happened in South Korea, and a comparison to what's going on in Italy. Italy's having a terrible problem, and they've got, you know, many more deaths than South Korea has. It's just unbelievable, the comparison. And I mean, I hear that Italy's healthcare for the elderly is really not that great. So why that's true, I'm not sure, but they do have socialized medicine, and I just it's another word on the street thing that they're Italians, their healthcare system for the elderly is failing. So anyway, let me get this video started on MedCram video started. It'll take me about 30 seconds.
MedCram.com.
Welcome to another MedCram. Welcome to another MedCram COVID-19 update. We are in pandemic. Italy has shut.
Okay, 3, 2, 1.
Welcome to another MedCram COVID-19 update. We see here that the total recovered is 16 times that of the total deaths. And we can see here that the active cases are once again starting to come back up again. That's because of the activity outside of China. In terms of today, March 10th, we can see that there's a number of cases in multiple countries all over the world. And of course, the news from yesterday is that Italy has decided to extend its lockdown to not just the north of Italy, but to all of Italy. In terms of yesterday, in Spain, the number of cases have essentially doubled with 557 new cases, and that seems to be a new hotspot. I can tell you as of yesterday, I was able to get a lab test out of a commercial test company that I needed to have done in a patient in the emergency room. So I'm hoping that that is going to increase dramatically here in the next week or so.
We've talked about zinc here a couple of updates ago, but the story's not done. It's kind of an exciting story that gives me some cautious optimism in terms of COVID-19. But to understand this better, we've got to go back and look at the molecular biology of the cell once again. Here is the nucleus of the cell. In the nucleus of the cell is the DNA. The DNA is a double-stranded string of nucleotides, which are the codes. Those codes are transcribed using RNA polymerase into RNA. That RNA then goes out of the nucleus, gets a 5' cap, and gets a 3' poly A tail, and it's ready for ribosomes to come on to read that code. And that code is then translated into the code of amino acids, which amino acid after amino acid will turn into a polypeptide, which turns into a protein. And proteins are how the cell gets things done. So it moves by proteins, actin and myosin. It can bind oxygen through hemoglobin. It can do cellular metabolism. All of those enzymes in glycolysis, in the citric acid cycle, all those things that you learned in biochemistry, those are all enzymes, those are all proteins. So that's the normal situation. Now enter coronavirus. Coronavirus has its own genome. It is made out of RNA, and that RNA just happens to have a 5' head and a poly A tail. So when it pops into the cytosol, it's going to be read by those same ribosomes that can't tell the difference. Except this time, instead of making a protein that's useful to your cell, this RNA that comes out of the virus is going to make something called a RNA-dependent RNA polymerase. And it's this enzyme right here that is going to read from the 3' M to the 5' end of the viral RNA and replicate it. So this RNA-dependent RNA polymerase makes more viral genomes. It's also known as replicase for that reason. And there's something that has been shown to inhibit this replicase, and that is zinc. Zinc will shut down RNA-dependent RNA polymerase or replicase. And so that is what we learned. The problem is, how do you get zinc inside the cell? The problem with zinc is that it's an ion. It's a 2+ ion. And ions cannot get through the cellular membrane unless there's a transporter that allows it to come in. In fact, the way that they tested this in the paper is with an ionophore, which allows the zinc to come into the cell. So they could see that the activity of this RNA-dependent RNA polymerase was reduced. This is the paper. Zinc inhibits coronavirus RNA polymerase activity in vitro, and zinc ionophores block the replication of these viruses in cell culture. When they looked at the SARS-CoV virus, that was the one that was seen back in 2002, as the zinc concentration inside the cell went up, you can see that the byproduct of the RNA-dependent RNA polymerase went down, 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 clearly demonstrating that zinc intracellularly is going to block this very important enzyme of the virus. Well, that's great. We've got zinc that's going to block it, but how are we going to get zinc inside the cell?
So I'm going to interrupt here for a minute. Interesting that I sent in the Google group, I sent this information, this same video out with some links to these different papers for everyone. So I hope that you all got a chance to look at that. There's a lot of microbiology stuff. But if you can get past that, we're really talking about zinc getting in a cell and fighting the virus. So the question is, how do you get the zinc inside the cell? And I think now he's going to have some discussion on out, so I'll let this continue.
It's one thing to say that you're going to take zinc supplements, but how do those zinc supplements, first of all, get absorbed into your body, into the blood, into the extracellular space? And then finally, how are you going to get that zinc from the extracellular space into the intracellular space in the cytosol, where it needs to work on these infected cells and these viral proteins? Well, that's another thing altogether. What you need is some sort of ionophore or some sort of gated mechanism to open and to allow that zinc to come into the cell, increasing the concentration of zinc into the cell so it can block RDRP. Well, enter this paper that was pointed out by some of you commenting. Chloroquine is a zinc ionophore. This paper was published back in 2014, and the point of this paper was something completely different. They weren't thinking about coronavirus. They probably didn't even know, perhaps, that zinc blocked RNA-dependent RNA polymerase. What they were looking at here is that zinc may help some of these cancer cells basically eat themselves in the lysosomes, which are sort of the trash compactors of the cell, and that by giving chloroquine, you could have these cancer cells disappear. Well, in doing that research, they found out something that's very interesting to us because of that finding. And this research came out of the University of Oklahoma and some institutions in China. So this is what they used: chloroquine diphosphate. Here's the structure of that compound. And this chloroquine is a medication that has been around for decades that is used to treat malaria. It's not under patent, and it's pretty dirt cheap and widely available. However, you do need a prescription to use this, and it doesn't come without side effects. What they show is that they were able to detect intracellular zinc by checking its fluorescence. Here on the x-axis, we have increasing concentrations of chloroquine, and the white bars represents those cells that were bathed in only 5 micromolar solution of zinc chloride, and the black was in 10 times that amount at 50 micromolars concentration of zinc chloride. And what you can see here is that in the normal situation, if you're able to get some zinc into the cells, this is the amount of zinc you will see inside the cells. So this is the amount of concentration outside the cell. This is the amount of zinc you see inside the cell. And let's just look at this same concentration, 5 micromolar. When you bathe the cells in chloroquine, you can see how much this intracellular zinc concentration goes up. In fact, if you look at the amount of zinc inside the cell, by just adding a small amount of chloroquine here at 10 micromolar, we would get more zinc inside the cell than if we increased the concentration of zinc outside the cell tenfold. That's how powerfully chloroquine will increase intracellular zinc concentration. Now remember, this is chloroquine. This is a medication that's been used by millions of people already with known side effects, and it's pretty well tolerated. Here's another example from the article. Here we have the control group, the 5 micromolar of zinc chloride. And then what we do is we multiply that extracellular zinc concentration tenfold. So it's now 50 micromolar. And so this would be the equivalent of just saturating the extracellular fluid compartment with zinc and see if it tries to get into the cell, which is what you're trying to do when you take a zinc lozenge, essentially. And you can see there's hardly any effect. It's minimal. And that's because zinc is an ion. It's a positively charged ion. And positively charged ions will not get into the cell unless there is a gate that allows it to go in. And there is gates that allow it to come in. That's how it's very tightly regulated. But chloroquine activates those gates. And so you can see this is at 50 micromoles of zinc chloride. We can go back to the 5 micromoles here, but just adding 300 micromoles of chloroquine lights this thing up like a Christmas tree. And you can see here, if we go to 50, again, it lights up even more. But the biggest effect is not the jump in the zinc concentration. It's opening those gates that allows you to get the zinc into the cell. And presumably when that zinc gets into the cell, it's going to block that viral enzyme. And in the discussion, we've got the conclusion of the matter. The conclusion that chloroquine is a zinc ionophore is based on the detection of significantly elevated intracellular zinc levels when both zinc and chloroquine were added to the cell culture medium. So the question is this being used? And to that, I turn to Korea Biomedical Review. Physicians work out treatment guidelines for coronavirus. Notice that this is published here on the 13th of February when they were starting to see an uptick in their cases in Korea. And the article goes on to say, Korean physicians treating the patients infected with the new coronavirus, COVID-19, have established the treatment guidelines for the unpreceded coronavirus. The key guidelines are the following. If patients are young and healthy, then they will be observed. If more than 10 days have passed since the onset of the illness, they'll continue to watch them. But notice what happens if the patients are old, have underlying conditions, or sick and have symptoms. They say here for antiviral treatment, the doctors recommend lopinavir and ritonavir. This is basically the medication Kaletra, which is an HIV medication, and they recommend 2 tablets twice a day. Or they can use chloroquine, 500 milligrams per day orally. In Korea, chloroquine is not available, so they use a very close relative of chloroquine, which is hydroxychloroquine, and that's at 400 milligrams orally per day. Now, the reason why you would not want to use both is because they interact with each other in a negative way in terms of prolonging the QT interval. For those of you who don't know what the QT interval is, this is a measurement of electrical conduction in the myocardium, in the heart, and if the QT becomes too prolonged, you can get fatal cardiac arrhythmias. In this article, they do talk about the antiviral treatment lasting about 7 to 10 days, but it could be shortened or extended. And here is one of the keys that I want to mention. This is all being used empirically. We don't have randomized controlled trials looking at chloroquine in patients with COVID-19. That being said, there has been some publications, interestingly, coming out of China, which do tout the efficacy of chloroquine. Now, I have to say at this point that it's a little bit interesting that that's happening from my standpoint and from the standpoint of somebody who understands what a randomized controlled trial that's blinded says. Because if you are truly doing a blinded study, you will not be able to tell if an intervention is working or not. That's the whole point of a blinded study, and that is to avoid bias. For instance, if you know that someone's getting the intervening choice, you might be doing a better job of taking care of that patient without even knowing it. So it's a little interesting to hear that there may be some efficacy, some improvement in some of these patients unless it was an unblinded study. And if it's an unblinded study, then it has to be taken with a grain of salt, and that's why we really need a randomized, placebo-controlled, double-blinded, ideally, type of study. Anyway, here is an article that is indexed, Expert Consensus on Chloroquine Phosphate for the Treatment of Novel Coronavirus Pneumonia. This was published in February 2020. It says here, previous studies have shown that chloroquine phosphate, or chloroquine, had a wide range of antiviral effects, including anti-coronavirus. Here we found that treating the patients diagnosed as novel coronavirus pneumonia with chloroquine might improve the success rate of treatment and improve patient outcome. In order to guide and regulate the use of chloroquine in patients with novel coronavirus pneumonia, The multi-center collaboration group developed this expert consensus. It is recommended chloroquine phosphate 500 milligrams twice per day for 10 days for patients diagnosed as mild, moderate, and severe cases of coronavirus pneumonia and without contraindications to chloroquine. So interestingly, the Koreans are using, according to the literature, once a day, and the Chinese were using it twice a day. Now, that is all to say, if we look at South Korea numbers, and of course we know that they have extensively tested, and this is my hypothesis, if you extensively go out and try to find as many cases as you possibly can, and then you set up a standardized treatment regimen and get people on that regimen early, you can see here that even though Italy and South Korea have very similar total cases, the number of deaths is an order of magnitude different. The number of serious and critical is more than an order of magnitude different between them. And one has to wonder, either the tip of the iceberg is much, much smaller on a very, very large iceberg in terms of Italy, or there is some sort of systematic treatment difference between what is going on in Italy and what is going on in South Korea. At this point, I don't know how widespread chloroquine use is in Italy, but it'd be interesting to find out. We'll end on this, where they talk about the trials of coronavirus. Data from the drug study showed certain curative effect with fairly good efficacy. Chinese National Center for Biotechnology Development Deputy Head Sun Yanrong said that chloroquine, an anti-malarial medication, was selected after several screening rounds of thousands of existing drugs. According to Sun, patients treated with chloroquine demonstrated a better drop in fever, improvement of lung CT images, and required a shorter time to recover compared to parallel groups. The percentage of patients with negative viral nucleic acid tests was also higher with the anti-malarial drug. Chloroquine has so far showed no obvious serious adverse reactions in more than 100 participants in the trials. So, getting back to our idea here of what's going on in molecular, we've got zinc here that needs to shut down RNA-dependent RNA polymerase. And what we're saying here is that chloroquine is going to somehow open up this ion gate and allow the zinc to come in to block and shut down viral replication inside of the cells. I think that's exciting. I'm cautiously optimistic that this may lead to something, but again, I have to stress that we need randomized controlled trials to prove this. Many times we come up with ideas that make sense and look like they should work, but the proof is in the pudding, and we need to do the randomized controlled trial. We've got a lot more areas to hit on this coronavirus. One of the things that we're going to look at is the ACE2 receptor. I have a lot of questions about the ACE2 receptor. We'll talk about that in upcoming updates.
Okay, thank you, Doctor. That was, I hope that was pretty enlightening for everybody. This chloroquine, we've used that for a long time to treat folks with malaria. And they also use chloroquine to treat people with MS. So, it looks like South Korea's onto it. China was using it. And the doctor said it would be interesting to see if Italy, had gone to that. I know in Spain they were using the same drug that he talked about that's an HIV drug. But Spain is right now kind of out of control. Also, they had a big jump the last couple of days. So Italy, I don't know. You would think the WHO, one of the things they would do is that all this treatment and with all these patients, that they would be sharing this information with all the different countries. I would hope so. Anyway, we're going to put up another video. This is the last of 3 that I want to show you. It's another MedCram video. And first I'm going to put up this PowerPoint that I was talking about. And it has to do with, what's going on in your home, keeping your home safe, and what to advise your family members to do. And here are some of the things we're talking about. Clean your hands at the door in regular intervals. Create habits and reminders to avoid touching their face and cover coughs and sneezes. Disinfect surfaces like doorknobs, tables, and handrails regularly. You heard from the doctor about how long this coronavirus is surviving on different types of surfaces. And increase ventilation by opening windows or adjusting air conditioning. Households with vulnerable seniors or those with significant underlying conditions. And those conditions would include heart, lung, kidney disease, diabetes, and conditions that suppress the immune system. Have the healthy people in the household conduct themselves as if they were a significant risk to the person with the underlying conditions. For example, wash hands frequently before interacting with a person, such as by feeding or caring for the person. If possible, provide a protected space for vulnerable household members. Ensure all utensils and surfaces are cleaned regularly. And households with sick family members. Give sick members their own room if possible and keep the door closed. Have one family member care for them. Consider providing additional protections or more intensive care for household members over 65 years old or with underlying conditions. It says what every American community can do now to decrease the spread of coronavirus. And then we go down to the next slide. This is keeping commercial establishments safe. Encourage your employees and customers to stop handshaking. Use other non-contact methods of greeting. A wave, maybe, elbows, you got shirts on, etc. So clean hands at the door and schedule regular hand washing reminders by email. Promote tap and pay to limit handling of cash. Disinfect surfaces like doorknobs, tables, desks, and handrails regularly. Increase ventilation. Same as in your home. Use booking and scheduling to stagger customer flow. To avoid crowding, use online transactions where possible. Consider limiting attendance at larger gatherings. And for transportation businesses, taxis, and ride shares, keep windows open when possible. Increase ventilation. Regularly disinfect surfaces. So those are some of the things that we've seen recommended by CDC. I think the president talked about these a couple days ago. And so we can all kind of do our part at home and at the at our our businesses, our small businesses. People need to earn a living, and we need to help these small businesses survive. And today, my wife went to get a pedicure, and the guy there that did her pedicure was complaining about the drop in business at his place, and that's because I think people are they're afraid to go out we've got to go out, do the things we need to do, carry on with our daily lives, be prepared, but there are precautions that people are being told, and they're going to work. So let's follow those instructions, that good advice, and we'll all be okay. So now I'm going to look for this last MedCram video, which I think it's number 35, and this is some data, and he says he's talking about new outbreaks and travel restrictions. This is I think this is about a day old. It might be March 11th or 12th. So I'll put this up right now. It's coming up on your browser. And we're going to be up there in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Here we go.
Italy has shot up dramatically to 12,000 cases. South Korea is still around 7,800. We've been looking at those two, wondering what the difference is between Italy and South Korea. Italy has an excellent healthcare delivery system, as does South Korea. Many possible explanations for the differences in those two. Here in the United States, we have a total of 1,300 cases, total deaths 38, total recovered 15, serious or critical 10, and that's around 4 cases per million population.
I want to interrupt here for a minute, and let's think about that death toll for the United States. Today it's up to 41, but 70% of those are in that nursing home up in Washington, in the state of Washington. So, they got a big problem. They didn't react in time. They didn't protect their healthcare workers. They just, they violated almost every rule that everybody's putting out and laying out to protect yourselves. So it's really unfortunate, but many deaths up there compared to the rest of the country. So we'll go on here.
A number of things have happened politically, which you probably already know about. The president has banned flights in from Europe except for Great Britain. The National Basketball Association has essentially canceled the season at this point. Tom Hanks and his wife, who are in Australia, report that they are infected with coronavirus. And there are a number of new cases here, and especially around on the West Coast and East Coast in cities. Our last update, we did talk about zinc and zinc ionophores and the ability of chloroquine to inhibit RNA-dependent RNA polymerase from coronavirus. Essentially, we're looking at chloroquine and its derivatives as an antiviral medication in prevention. And we said that it's potentially possible that the mechanism that this chloroquine or hydroxychloroquine works through is through a zinc ionophore mechanism. Well, I wanted to show you this paper that was published just 3 days ago, and it looked specifically at the in vitro antiviral activity and optimized dosing regimen for hydroxychloroquine, which is a better tolerated and more available medication, and chloroquine for the treatment of COVID-19. They looked at hydroxychloroquine because it's an immunomodulator. It might be able to attenuate this, quote, cytokine storm, which is involved with ARDS, which we've talked about before. I want to stress that there currently is no evidence to support the use of hydroxychloroquine in SARS-CoV-2 infection. We don't have any randomized controlled trials, and that's exactly why they are using this medication and trying to figure out the appropriate dosing before they are able to start a randomized controlled trial. So if you look here, they took cells and they incubated them in this medication, and they subjected them to the actual SARS-CoV-2 virus. And they also did it the other direction. They had the virus in the cells, and then they treated them with this hydroxychloroquine in different concentrations. They also looked at chloroquine as well. The conclusion of the research was that hydroxychloroquine was found to be more potent than chloroquine to inhibit SARS-CoV-2, and the key word here is in vitro. So here's the data. We can see here chloroquine on the left and hydroxychloroquine here on the right. And as we increase the concentrations of either one, whether or not the drug was there for 24 hours or 48 hours, as the concentration of the drug goes up, the percent of inhibition goes up. For instance, in the hydroxychloroquine, we were able to see these values going up higher, therefore inhibiting more virus. And of course, if it was there for 48 hours, we would have seen it inhibiting even more than if it was there for only 24 hours, letting you believe that the drug is starting to accumulate more and more in those first 24 to 48 hours. You can also see that given hydroxychloroquine at 1 micromolar, at 48 hours, it's able to hit 50% of inhibition, whereas over here, you need a much higher concentration to hit 50% of inhibition. And that's exactly what these E numbers are. So the lower the E number, the better. And you can see here for hydroxychloroquine, these E numbers are smaller than the corresponding chloroquine numbers. Down here, they have prophylactic treatment, which means that they were incubated with this medication before the virus was given. And you can see here that the numbers are much better for hydroxychloroquine because the values go up fairly high and they stay up. In other words, in this case, if you were on hydroxychloroquine for 48 hours prior to infection with the actual coronavirus SARS-CoV-2, and it was at this concentration, there would be absolutely no viral replication occurring. The way they did this was using reverse transcriptase PCR. They also looked at the dosing, and they could see here how often would they need to actually dose this medication. And they found that if they gave it for just 4 or 5 days, it stayed in the system for quite a long time, and the plasma concentration didn't decrease, and it was still affected. Here we can see blood concentration not dropping too much. And here in the lung concentration, where it would be needed the most, it hardly dropped at all. It was concentrated in the lungs. So even though it was stopped at day number 5, it still hung around for an additional at least 5 days. So the overall study results were that based on these models, a loading dose of 400 milligrams twice for the first day, and then followed by a maintenance dose of 200 milligrams given twice daily for 4 days, is recommended for SARS-CoV-2 infection. And again, I wanted to mention this because we had talked previously about that. So as hospitals across the country start to see this kind of an infection coming in, this may be one type of treatment that you consider. If the mechanism of action for hydroxychloroquine and chloroquine in vitro in stopping the virus is related at all to the fact that it's also a zinc ionophore, then the question is obvious. Do other zinc ionophores do the same thing? And here's the zinc ionophore quercetin. Does quercetin also do the same thing in terms of increasing zinc intracellularly and blocking viral production? Well, here we have some data that was published, and we'll put a link to this article in the description below. And you can see here clearly that when you add zinc in an increasing concentration, zinc does get inside the cell. But when you add quercetin, it's going to increase the amount of zinc inside the cell. So the next question is, does it actually reduce virus? Well, again, an in vitro study, quercetin as an antiviral agent inhibits influenza A virus entry. This study indicates that quercetin, showing inhibitory activity in the early stage of influenza infection, provides a future therapeutic option to develop effective, safe, and affordable natural products for the treatment and prophylaxis of influenza infections. This is not COVID-19. This is influenza. And here we can see that at 0 quercetin, we see a lot of viral particles here that are illuminated with the fluorescent antibodies. And as we increase the dose of quercetin, you can see that the number of particles decreases rapidly until it's not seen at all. As we can see here, there is some evidence that quercetin had already been proven successful at treating Ebola and Zika viruses. The question is, what's going on with COVID-19? And here we have a story from CBC, which is the news organization of Canada. Spread speeds up. Montreal researchers will trial an antiviral treatment for COVID-19 in China. These two researchers here out of Montreal are wanting to test quercetin in the arena of COVID-19. Now, this drug is derived from plants, and you don't need a prescription for it, and you can actually get this over the counter. Now, in the number of studies that I've seen and researched on the internet, this medication was tested in Zika and Ebola viruses at a dose of around 50 to 100 milligrams per kilogram, which would mean that you're talking about 3 to 7 grams a day of this medication, which is just astounding. I don't know if that's the dose that is actually needed, but that's what the studies were showing. Let's summarize what we found out here for zinc ionophores, and we may come back to this. First of all, we have no randomized controlled trials for any of this, so we can't say that any of this actually works. But the Chinese have just published a paper a couple days ago showing that hydroxychloroquine is superior to chloroquine in terms of potency. And their proposed dosing regimen would be 400 milligrams twice a day for 1 day, and then 200 milligrams orally twice a day for 4 days. PO means per os, that means in the mouth. BID means twice a day. In terms of quercetin, we don't know. It is over the counter. We don't know dosing. Again, no randomized controlled trials. This is what they're actually working on trying to do at this point. It should be noted, and there were some questions about this, that if this is a zinc ionophore, question is should you take a zinc supplement? I think it's more important that you're not zinc deficient than it is that you try to boost up your zinc blood levels, because again, those are regulated. If you have more zinc in your blood than you should be having, your body's going to regulate that by trying to get it out of your system and trying to pee it out. Of course, that can be overwhelmed if you take too much zinc, so you don't want to do that either. So I think the key here is don't be zinc deficient. So question on zinc supplements. Thanks for joining us.
Okay, thank you, Doctor. So we learned more about chloroquine and quercetin, and kind of looked that up on Amazon. Yeah, you can buy over-the-counter quercetin on Amazon, just to let you folks know. I think the dosage that I saw was 500 milligram dosages. So, of course, zinc is a supplement you can buy over the counter too. And Amazon has all of those natural vitamins, etc., minerals. So something to consider. And we hope a lot of this was good information for you folks. We believe we're making progress, and I think everybody just needs to relax and try to believe in the healthcare system in this country and our president. They're doing everything they can to slow down the spread and to be able to not overwhelm the hospitals. And there actually are some treatments that are being used, that were used in China. They're being used in South Korea. So, that's all good news that you may not have heard out of any of the media so far. So anyway, we'll continue these MedCram updates as we check them every day. Usually that doctor, he's an ER doctor, so the weekends he doesn't do any videos. So anyway, you folks all take care, and I gave you all the news about what's coming up in the future. So we'll do another show next week, and everybody be safe, follow the good advice of the CDC, and we'll see you next week.